That was terrific, Dick. I know we're going to have lots of questions. Our second panelist, the HR practitioner, is Evelyn Rodstein. Evelyn has actually spoken here before. She has been the Chief Talent Officer or Managing Director in Talent, Leadership, Organizational Effectiveness, and Learning at 5 different global Fortune 100 companies. Also a Big 4 professional services firm and a rapidly growing entrepreneurial middle market company in diverse industries. All of her roles involved working with companies that were going through significant change. Welcome, Evelyn.
Thank you. Good morning. Hi. I just have a quick question. How many of you are in an early stage of implementing metrics in your company? Okay. How many would say you're in an evolved stage, that you're really at the midpoint where you feel comfortable that you've got a good process? Okay, and how many of you feel like you are part of the business strategy, the metrics are just like breathing air, and it's not so much a question? Only Dick, okay. We need Dick. This is going to be a difficult panel because I agree with much of what Dick has said. And the irony is he's spoken about leadership, I'm a leadership expert, and I'm about to speak about metrics, okay? So I'm going to do my best on this. I am not a metrician, but I am a very experienced practitioner. And my early training, I spent 8 years as a clinician doing individual and family therapy. And here's what I found. The best metrics professionals, and I had 5 of them in one company on my team, the best HR professionals, the best clinicians have the same common attributes. They can diagnose cause from symptom, okay? They know what the root cause of an issue is. They know how to get there. They can figure out what the leverage points are to change an organization so they're not boiling the ocean. And they know how to tell difficult things to people in a way they can hear them, and they can create a compelling narrative for change. You all do this every day, and now we're faced with the world of big data and metrics. And if you are not an accountant or an IO psychologist, it can be intimidating. But even for the other industries that are going through this secular change, data can be intimidating. A colleague of mine sent me a study that was part of a drug test. This was from the head of statistics at Columbia University. They tested a drug. They gave the data to 2 different scientific groups. One group found that the drug worked. One group found that the drug did not work. Okay, so even in the world of people who are full-time metricians, the data can be confusing. It can be difficult, so we need to go forward with courage and rely on our skills. Our skills are our insight, our intuition, our judgment, our critical thinking, our storytelling skills, and we can master however big data changes our field. Now, let's start with putting in some metrics in an organization. I did include in my package, it'll be sent to you after the presentation this morning. It's an article that won the Walker Prize on how to put in a metrics program in your organization from the Human Resource Planning Society. It's a good article. You'll get it after the presentation, and it's got some good basics. But I'm going to talk about how I start, and I'm sure how all of you start. You start with the pressing business need. You start with the strategic issue facing your business. All of these talent management systems we're buying give us too much data. We don't want to present too much data. We want to present the core data that's going to actually move the needle on the organization. And here's what's really important, and we know this as practitioners. We need to co-create these metrics with our CEO, with our division heads. We can't hold these ourselves. We need to sit down, have conversations, and say, what's really important for you to see change in? What kind of metrics would tell you that this is changing our organization? What are the numbers you want to see, and what are they going to mean to you? And most importantly, how are you going to measure your leaders against those numbers? And we don't want 100 metrics, we want a few critical ones. It's also very important, in my experience as a practitioner, that you involve marketing and the CFO. Because there's no change in an organization if the staff groups aren't aligned, right? It just doesn't happen. So you want to co-create those metrics with your other core staff groups, because they, A, have the data, Marketing has the customer service and customer loyalty data. The CFO has all the financial data. And you've got to be thinking alike and being able to use that data to integrate it. So you're not showing pure people numbers and pure people data. It's very powerful to show customer data, people data, financial data all aligned. Use the data sensitively. This is often revealing soft points or weak points in an organization, and you've got the judgment on how to do that. Make sure the entire HR team on your staff is on board with these metrics. We've become a very complex profession. Every one of our specialty areas has become very, very technical, and people grow up in comp, or they grow up in talent, or they grow up in employee relations, and there's no line of sight across your team. And if your team isn't engaged in the overall HR strategy and what those metrics are, you're not going to get very far. And lastly, use wisdom from the metrics as a compelling narrative and story for organizational change. I mean, you've got a great storyline with these metrics, and we want to make sure we know how we use them. What happens when we don't follow those rules? Okay, you ready? Here's a story that is true. None of these stories, by the way, have occurred in any of my companies, okay? These are all gathered anonymously from my many, many colleagues in the field, okay? Imagine you're a company and you hire 2 full-time people to do HR analytics for you, and you create the most beautiful scorecard in the world, and you send it out every month to the 20 top business leaders. And then one day some junior kid raises his hand in technology and says, wouldn't it be interesting to click on that email and see how many people open the attachment? Those 20, out of those 20 executives, how many do you think open that attachment? 3. Okay, we don't want to do that. That's HR's worst nightmare. And you know what happens then when the company has difficulty? Who gets downsized, right? Who loses their job? All right, this is serious stuff. I'm laughing because if we don't laugh about what we do, we can't get through the day. But who loses their job? Those 2 analytics people and maybe the head of HR. So we don't ever want to be in that position. Here's another example that we never want to be. I'm a first-line manager. I have a gotcha survey every year. What is the gotcha survey? It's the engagement survey. I get all of this data on everything that's wrong in my department, and I have no idea what to do with it. There are 20 action steps, there are 40 variables. I have no line of sight on how my behavior will change that will be, and this is where I agree with Dick, that will be cosmetic or actually drive the revenue numbers of my business. And I don't know what to do with that data. So to me, it's not a tool to use my business, it's just an overwhelming experience that makes me feel wrong, that makes me feel helpless, that makes me lose my efficacy as a first-line manager. And what's the last thing we want to do with a first-line manager? Have them lose that sense of efficacy, that sense of control. So I agree with Dick, shorter, more frequent pulse surveys that actually have a line of sight. And there are amazing things that professional consultants can do to help you with this, to create algorithms that connect the data to business causality, that can help you create a certain, and this is where sometimes you really do need a metrics professional to help you so that your survey has some punch. Metrics that executives are not prepared for the bad news. Let's stay with surveys for a minute. I have been in countless executive committee meetings where the financial dashboard is shown and the division head sees that his business is doing poorly and the revenue numbers are down. He's fine about it. They problem solve. They talk about new markets. They talk about pricing. They talk about competitive advantage. Let's take a minute. We're in that same meeting, and that division head has numbers that say his turnover is down, people don't understand his strategy, no one's communicating. They get very defensive. How many people in the room have organizations that manage creative people? Okay. What happens when you criticize a creative director's work? It's very, very personal. That is what happens when you criticize somebody's leadership and management skills. They will listen to a business narrative and change that, and they'll be very objective. But if someone's business leadership skills are criticized in front of the CEO, what do you mean? I communicate my strategy 7 times a day. How come they don't understand it? I care about my people. How can they say it's a hostile work environment? It's very personal, right? Does that sound right, guys? really personal. So with that kind of data, you know how to manage it. You know how to present that data to the division head before he gets into the CEO's meeting if necessary. You know how to coach the CEO that when he gets to that data with that division head, he can have that conversation directly and objectively and even critically, but in a non-personalized manner. I mean, it's a sensitive data. And then here's my last metrics nightmare, okay? Someone, not me, is sitting in a room with 25 recruiters from across the city. They're talking about big data. They're talking about time to hire data. And they're talking about how this causes arguments between the business line and who say, well, the time to hire is because HR is no good at getting candidates, and HR is saying the time to hire data is no good because you keep canceling interviews. And someone asks, do you know the turnover rate of the people you hire and what happens to them? All the recruiters shake their head. They do not know. You never want to manage an HR department where one side doesn't know what the other side is doing, okay? All those time to hire metrics are meaningless if the recruiters don't know why people are leaving once they've been hired. You want that line of sight. And lastly, I'm going to talk now about how you use metrics as part of an organizational change transformation. And this is my specialty area. This is my comfort zone. The metrics I'm going to be talking about are only a tool in moving these organizations over a 1 to 5 year time frame. And the cases have been disguised, okay? The first case is moving from a product-focused to a client-focused organization. This was a 3-year intervention. A very strong financial service company, very creative, strong products. But the CEO came in, a new CEO came in, and he said, I want a more customer-focused organization. I want us focused on long-term customer relationships. We need to transform the culture. We need to change the company. So what did we do? We did all the right things. We put in massive sales training to give people relationship skills. And we measured it, okay, using all the Kilpatrick 4 ratings to make sure we had impact. We changed the performance management system to reward collaboration, long-term client revenue, you name it. We changed the compensation system so that people got rewarded, and we put in customer survey metrics. Okay, what happened? First year, nobody believed it. Okay, they were like, this is just another change. It's like the Russian peasants saying, oh, well, outwait this new czar. Then they got paid against it. People began to open up their eyes. Then the sales training actually kicked in and gave people the skills they needed. Okay, so they were able to say, hey, I can actually do this. And the performance reviews really helped create a sense of where they needed to focus. And we had strategy offsites that had cross-team collaboration and cross-selling. But do you know what metric really drove the change home? It was the customer survey scores. When they saw that customers were talking narratively and in a metrics-focused way about how much they appreciated their relationships with this company, it created a compelling narrative. Our CEO could use that in his corporate communications. It became a symbol of everything this company had changed. Which of those metrics was the most important? I'm not sure. But all together, they created, and they took us from here to here, and that's always our goal, isn't it? We want to get us, the organization, from here to here. Second case, a very large merger, maybe 200,000 person company, big complex merger. So a culture survey was conducted, giant culture survey, reams of data, too much data, okay? Unbelievable, and without a context, because what use is describing a culture without a strategy, right? Does it matter if you're analytic or you're creative? Does it matter if you're inclusive or not? The data was so overwhelming. What did we do? We took the teams of business leaders into rooms and had a series of strategic offsites, and we looked at the data. Do you know what the most important questions on that culture survey were? What's the strategy of our business? How are we going to compete? What are our business levers? For example, One company had a plain vanilla commoditized product, and all they needed to do was produce thousands and thousands of these widgets without a lot of variability, okay? So what kind of management were they? Controlling, a few at the top. What kind of culture did they have? Consistent. The other culture, well, the other company was very creative, very innovative, lots of new products, very expensive, high-end. What kind of culture were they? Entrepreneurial, breaking rules, running all over the place, no management structure. Talking about the culture wasn't going to get us very far, but when they were able to look at the strategy data and say, what kind of business strategy do we want to create? What kind of company do we want to be? That's when we could begin to make progress. And as they carved out their market options and the strategy for that company and what it was going to be, then we could have values, then we can have culture, then we could deal with those issues. So my recommendation on that is make sure that all of your data is grounded in 2 or 3 really meaty business strategy questions. The pivot point questions, as John Boudreau says, the key questions that are going to drive that business. Okay, third case. This is another example of using the data in a different way. This is a retail company, and the turnover of its managers, by the way, I've also done this in healthcare, so I've done this twice now. The turnover of the managers who were not frontline managers, but I would say division managers, almost 100%. People kept leaving because they were such burnout jobs, all right? And this was a huge business issue. It didn't matter if they were A players, B players, C players, they're just no players, okay? All right? The job was really tough, all right? Very tough, very demanding, multiple constituencies. Very difficult. So what were we going to do? We had the turnover data, and our strategy was to involve, in this case we had a contained population. We had about 20 of these division heads, and we said, we're going to create a leadership program. It's going to be taught by the CEO, and what this program is going to do is it's going to share the data so people can work on the problems and issues, but it's also going to teach them the leadership skills they need to manage this very difficult, pressured, time-stressed business. So over a 6-month period, we had, periodic 2-day leadership programs where we taught the leadership skills they needed to manage the stress of the job and the issues around the complexities of their constituencies. But we also put them in action learning teams and picked various options that they thought could impact turnover. Collaboration across businesses, staffing issues, etc. Through doing that, they were able to solve the business problems that impacted the turnover. They were able to feel inspired and positive and encouraged in their role, and they were able to actually get the leadership skills they needed to manage. So I have many, many more cases, but in summation, let me say, we have a point of view. Always start with a point of view. Don't just look at the data. Come in with a point of view. You have one as a professional. Co-create your point of view with your business heads, whether it's data or strategies or whatever. When you have co-creation, you have co-accountability. Use that data as a starting point for discussion. The wisdom comes from the discussion of the data, not the data, because the discussion leads to action. So make sure you have that data, discussion, action trajectory. Handle sensitive data in a way that makes people feel they can do something with it, and create a compelling narrative for all your employees with that data so that you can create organizational change. Thank you.